like some kind of flower. And there's a reconstruction of what this thing looks like. Now, some of you looked at pond water through a microscope, and you've seen some pretty weird stuff in there. I'm pretty sure you haven't seen one of those, and apparently to this day, paleontologists don't know where that fits. That was a big thing for Gould. We don't even know what these things are. This one here, Opabinia regalis. Isn't that a great fossil? It's awesome. Doesn't it look real? And there's the disgusting reconstruction of it. It's got nightmares and some weird proboscis thing sticking out of it. And you know, I'm certain you've never seen anything like this in your pond water. Yes.
What are the dimensions here?
In this case, I don't know. I'll show you in a second something that's pretty big. I think that's considered, it's like centimeters long. I don't know the dimensions of this. I'll say that one of the more recent discoveries, as in the 1990s, that's recent, I think, in the British field, but found a piece of what they thought was one species, turned out to be a piece of a crab that was a meter long, and they actually came up with the name terrible crab to go along with terrible lizard from dinosaur to sort of express these. There were some huge, hideous, awful things cruising around the ocean at this time, but I don't know the scale here. This is my favorite because it's everyone's favorite. Hallucigenia. Simon Conway Morris named it himself. He was alive in the 60s, not that surprising. So was I, but I was too young. And oh my gosh, so for years they bickered about, are these the legs, or are those the legs? No, this is a part of something else. It can't really be an animal. And eventually, and this is part of the story, kind of figured out, oh, it's not. It doesn't belong all by itself in some parallel universe of organisms. It's an autocophoran, a certain kind of primitive worm kind of thing. Okay, so these creatures I just showed you, it's a small sampling of some of the crazy stuff that's found in the Burgess Shale and similar deposits. So they're strange, and this is important, in many ways unlike anything we see today. And maybe we should go further, unlike anything we see anywhere else in the fossil record. At least that's what some people thought. So now, according to Gould, Walcott, when he was looking at these things, shoehorned them. That's his word he uses repeatedly. And what he means is that Walcott looked at that and he said, well, let's see which group should it go in. I've got the following groups that I figured out by looking at animals, you know, here, now. So Gould claims then that not only that Walcott shoehorned these, or jammed them into, well, I think it's and made stuff up, but he even devotes a significant part of his book to speculating on these psychological reasons why the man did this. I'll read to you later what at least one modern commentator thinks of that particular exercise. For what it's worth, apparently Walcott was a Presbyterian, so, you know, do whatever you want with that information. In any case, Gould's charge was he was forcing them into categories, and he did that because that's the only way he could see the world. So then Gould claims, and those categories, those ideas of Walcott's held for decades. And again, he found this deposit, he first started digging there 100 years ago, 1909. And so for decades, his interpretation sort of held. And then in the 60s and 70s, a group of people started looking really hard at these things. The leader of that group was someone in Whittington, and his sort of super bright, kind of crazy student was Simon Conway Morris. And they started looking again. So according to Gould, there was then this dramatic reinterpretation, with Simon as the major player, that corrected Walcott's many errors and concluded instead that many of the Burgess animals represent groups of animals utterly unknown today. All right, now, I'm going to read my conclusion here. He concluded there was vast diversity in that Cambrian era, diversity that was then lost and has not been seen since. And this is really important. What Gould did not say was merely, oh, there were some weird-looking things in the ocean back then, but there aren't anymore. That's not interesting. Everyone knows that. He was saying something more profound. He's saying there were representatives of whole groups of animals, which represented whole classes, and more accurately, whole phyla, for the biology classification gurus in the crowd. Whole phyla of animals that were characterized by particular body plans that were present there and didn't survive. didn't contribute to the tree of life after this point. You see, that's an important distinction. It wouldn't be at all worth coming down to this pit on a Friday afternoon when the weather is nice to talk about why some paleontologists think some interesting things aren't around anymore. That's not interesting. No, Gould went way further than that. He's like, there are phyla, and to him that word meant a lot. A phylum, right? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. This was a whole bundle of enormous potential that was cut off and never seen again. Okay. So Gould looks at all of that. He looks at these crazy creatures, only a few of which he claims could be recognized today, and he says, this is the story that's told here. Here are a whole bunch of creatures. It just happened, it's very convenient. There's a weird line right here. I don't think I put that there, but there it is. If we look right there, say 505 million years ago, we would see all this amazing diversity. And, okay, this is important, folks. Morphological diversity. Different forms, really different, importantly different forms, all there. But if you look here, they're all gone except for two. Calls it diversification and decimation. He loves that word, decimation. Decimation. He's got, passion. I don't know. He says that is the right model for life. And then he looks at this and thinks about how the world works, and he reaches now this conclusion about the nature of life. So again, he says, first of all, evolutionary history is extremely contingent, just like all of history is. Now I'm going to read a quote from his book so you can get with me about what I mean by contingency. A lot of people, I think it's easy to confuse the word contingency with chance or randomness, they're not the same thing. He says all of history is contingent. What if the bullet fired by Lee Harvey Oswald went this centimeters versus that, and then you're in a whole different future. It's a Wonderful Life. What if George was never born? Back to the Future. All right, let's not go further into lame cultural references. This is what Stephen Jay Gould says about contingency, what he really means. Sorry, I have to use these enhancement devices. Historical explanation, this is his point about contingency. Historical explanations take the form of a narrative. E, which is the phenomenon to be explained, arose because D came before that C, B, and A. All right, so A, B, C, D. Those are events. This is not the letter in progress. These are events. A had to happen, then B, etc. This is not complicated. Okay. If any of these earlier stages had not occurred or had transpired in a different way, then E would not exist. Well, that's the definition of contingency. Or it would be present in a form so altered that it would be E prime and it would require a different explanation. Thus, E makes sense and can be explained rigorously as the outcome of A through D, but no law of nature, that's the key phrase, I think, no law of nature enjoined E. Any variant E prime arising from an altered set of antecedents which would have been equally explicable but massively different in form and effect, would have been equally explicable. In other words, just as understandable, not miraculous, mysterious, though massively different in form and effect. Okay, so his point is that we should look at evolution as history, and history is contingent. And you can play these games if you didn't see It's a Wonderful Life or Back to the Future. Tell me you haven't ever asked the question, what if your parents hadn't met? Can you get in a time machine, go back and disrupt your parents at the Sadie Hawkins dance or whatever, and poof yourself out of existence? Yeah. History is contingent. Okay. He looks at that, and I hope no one disagrees with that. Like this, based on that, this based on that. But then he says, historical events can have dramatic influence without being predictable. That seems obvious to me. The classic example in the history of the world is the meteorite or the giant asteroid, whatever the thing was that came and, well, the standard story is it wiped out the dinosaurs, and that's a bit of a simplification. But this impact of an extraterrestrial object at the end of the Cretaceous period that radically altered the Earth and is thought to have led to a complete reshuffling of life on Earth. Hence, the dinosaurs go away, they left the birds, thank God, but otherwise they're gone. And that was our big chance, the mammals, because before that we were sort of hiding in the shadows, going, oh, who's going to eat me? And then suddenly, woohoo, it's party time, and then we irradiate, and here we are, down here in the pit on a nice day. So, just in case you aren't thinking about that right now. I'm trying to keep it interesting so you don't. Okay, that's a classic example. It's easy to think of others, hence the connection to It's a Wonderful Life. Here's his conclusion, and this is his famous conclusion. Therefore, if you rewind the tape of life and hit play